What is up, everybody? Gary Simon here. So today we're going to be checking out a JavaScript library for creating interesting touch-based parallax effects. And it's called Atropos. So if you just go to Atropos.js.com, I'll link it in the YouTube description. You will see this page right here. It's touch-friendly, so it works on mobile. Lightweight, it's just 2 kilobytes minified. Configurable, zero dependencies, etc. And there's some examples here of what you can do. And in this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use it to create something like this. All right, pretty cool, pretty snazzy. And yeah, so as always, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's get started. Now, wait 1 second. If you're interested in this, you might be interested in the front-end development career path from Scrimba.com. They've recently launched their front-end development career path, which is a collection of courses that cover HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and much, much more, as you see. It's over 75 hours of awesome content. There are hundreds of interactive coding challenges, and it's all geared towards helping you go from beginner to someone that's hireable as a front-end developer. So click on the very top link here in the YouTube description to get access to the front-end developer career path at Scrimba.com. All right, so here's the documentation for Atropos and installation. So we could use the Node package manager, which is Node.js, and we could install it that way. But we could also just download it. I really don't want to mess with npm anymore, just because the people who are watching this may not have it installed or whatever. So what I've done is I went to the Atropos npm GitHub repo and just downloaded it. And you only need 2 files, and I'm just going to take those files and extract them to your project folder. So by that, what I mean is you'll see right here is an empty folder here in Visual Studio Code. We have atropos.min.css and also .min.js. It's the only 2 files you need essentially. So what we'll do now is create an index.html file, and we're going to hit the exclamation point enter to get our boilerplate link. Type that in, hit enter, and then CSS main.css. That folder doesn't yet exist, so let's go ahead and create CSS. And we'll use Sass for this, main.scss for Sass. And in a second, watch Sass. So in order for you to see this, when you create that Sass file, you have to go to your extensions, type in live Sass compiler, and also a live server. We'll use that as well. All right, so we'll click watch Sass, and we can close this out. So if you don't know what Sass is, go ahead and just do a channel search or a YouTube search. There's many courses on Sass. It's basically just a improved way or heightened way of writing CSS, making your life just a tad bit easier. All right, so for index.html, let's see what's next here for getting things set up in the documentation. So what we'll want to do is first, let's copy this HTML right here. So this is the HTML layout. As you can see, all this stuff is required. These tags right here, these HTML elements with the associated classes are all required. There's a scale container, a rotate container, an inner container, and then your custom HTML goes here in the middle, which we will do in a second. So let's go ahead and revert back. I'm just going to paste that in. All right, and we'll see that, let me undo that. I hate how sometimes, by the way, as a side note, that when you paste in HTML, sometimes the divs don't line up at the end, like with the closing div tags. It's like right here, like why do that? Visual Studio Code, Microsoft, get your crap together. Anyhow, so yeah, our custom HTML is gonna go in here, but before we get to that point, let's go ahead and copy and paste the JavaScript portion that we have from our documentation. So we're going to use this version right here. If you are using npm to install, you'd want to use this stuff, but we're just going to have script right here. We'll reference our min.js file, as you can see, and we'll be almost ready. So let's paste that in, tab that all in, and this is just going to be right here, the default path. We're in the same folder, so it's going to go right here. And then, as you can see, we have our JavaScript, and we'll just keep it at this my-atropos, and we can see my-atropos is right there. Now it's not going to be working just yet. We have to reference a CSS file. So let's revert back here real quickly, and we will copy this, and that will go just before our main.css. And this is simply going to be same path. All right, awesome. So for just a test, let's put an H1 element testing here. Let's save that, right click, open with live server. You will see this only if you've installed that live server extension here in the extensions section. So let's go ahead and click that. And there you go, look. You can see that it works. Okay, obviously it looks like crap and it's not exciting. So let's go ahead and revert back to our design. And the design's right here. Let me just put this right here. And this is kind of what we want to create. So we first have to create the HTML markup necessary for getting all of this working. And then we'll write the CSS, and then we'll finally tackle the actual JavaScript portion. So because this isn't an HTML or even a CSS tutorial video, I'm going to end up just pasting a lot of this stuff. That way we can kind of move along quickly in this video tutorial. In the past, I would I would write everything from scratch, but I'm realizing it's unnecessary. You're not here to learn HTML. You're not here to learn CSS. All right. So now some of the CSS properties we will need to write from scratch, just so I can explain what's happening. But for the most part, for the HTML, we can just paste that right in. So what I'm going to do here is on my reference monitor, I already have the code done. And what I'm going to do is just paste in all this stuff. So I'm going to get rid of testing here. And let me get a pretty good white space inside of that container and just paste all this stuff in. All right, so what's happening? We have a div class container that's containing everything. We have the H1, and again, if we reference our design, fatal intensity, then I don't even know why I came up with this headline. Then we have some lorem ipsum text here, a button, and also the date. So the footer is an element that just kind of wraps around with the CSS grid. This section right here, that's all that is. All right, so we have the call to action, which is the share button. And then also we have the date right here. All right, so fairly simple, nothing too exciting. Of course, if we go look at the browser now, this is what it looks like. Not exciting, very ugly, puke-worthy indeed. All right, so let's go back and let's look at our Sass. And I'm just going to paste in the body rule set here. So we're taking the background, we're giving the same background as the Figma frame layout, margin 0, height 100, viewport height. Reason I do that is because we don't have enough content to really push the height of the content from the DOM elements all the way to the bottom of the browser. And so that's what we're doing here. Display grid, align content center, justify content center, that will center that single container element, or actually rather it'll center this element right here because it's our first element. And this is the element that we're placing the grid on. It'll center it vertically and horizontally. Very important. And then font family is Poppins. I already have that installed as a font on my machine. Typically, if this is a live project, you would also want to import that at the top from Google Fonts. All right, so let's save that and see what changes have been made. All right, there we go. Kind of a little bit trippy, right? All right, so let's come on and figure out what we're going to do next. Let's go ahead and take our actual my Atropos, which is the first element right here. So let's go ahead and write some a rule set for that. Atropos, and we're going to put a specific width, 320 pixels. Now, ordinarily, typically, if this were a real project, you'd want it to be responsive, but it's going to really elongate the process of this tutorial and the length of it. So we're just going to make it work for desktop. So then we're going to add in a background. And so the background, what I'm talking about, if we refer back to the Figma file right here, has this image right here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead real quickly. I'm going to need to reference that image. I've already saved it, so in my reference project, and I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code and reveal in File Explorer, and I'm just going to paste that image in. And the image that I'm talking about is this one right here. It's just kind of like this abstract image from unsplash.com. All right, so now we have that image, and what I'm going to do is paste in a rule set, or a property rather, right here. Background is going to be white, which is underneath that picture, and then URL is going to be outside of the current folder and into this folder, image.jpg, no repeat. And then these are some X and Y values to position it correctly. Now it may still be not looking correct. Yeah, and of course it's not, but it will be. We can see the image right here. So we're getting there slowly but surely. All right, so next up after that, let's go ahead and take our H1. Our H1 element, as you can see, is kind of offset centered and it's pretty large. So let's fix that as well. So we'll take our H1. We're going to do a font size of 2.4 rem units. White space is going to be no wrap. So what does no wrap do, or white space no wrap do essentially? That'll make it so that this always stays on one line. All right, it won't go down to a second line if there's not enough width available for it. So what else? We're going to put in margin top 0. And also we're going to put transform, translate X, and -90 pixels like that. All right, so if we go back here, we can see it is right there. Now, right now it looks nothing like the Figma because we still need to write some rule sets. All right, so let's go ahead and take, there is one rule set that contains multiple selectors. Right here, Atropos scale, rotate, enter, and container. So these three are the ones that we pasted from the documentation that are required. And then also container is also the one that we kind of created everything as a container around all of our custom HTML that we wrote. Overflow visible, position relative. This will make the H1 element not get cut off when we were doing margin left and all that stuff and kind of cutting it off. So now what we want to do is take our container, and remember that's the beginning of our custom HTML inside of the stuff from the documentation. We're going to do padding 2M, and let's just take a look at what we have so far. So now that padding 2M kind of moved this text and all this stuff away from the edges. All right, let's. I'm going to kind of zoom up just a bit so you can see things a little bit better. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and put a pseudo element of and before. And what we want is to create that little border that you saw at the beginning of the video. It's like a 1 pixel border. And we could do that with a pseudo element. So what we'll do is put position, absolute, and content empty. These two elements, when you're doing a pseudo element, like kind of like an extra graphical effect or so, on a parent CSS element, allows you to, basically these two properties are pretty much there every time when you're trying to do this sort of thing. I'm gonna go ahead and paste in a few more properties just because it's kind of lengthy, and I'll explain them in a second. So height 100%, width 100%, that makes this element, this pseudo element, be 100% of the width and height of the parent element right here. And then we're giving a border of 1 pixel solid black. And for now, we're going to just turn these two, or uncomment those two off for a second. And now if we save this, there we go. That's what happens. So this is the container element, this whole white container right here. And then this is the pseudo element that we just created. All right. So additionally, these two elements, I'm not going to describe those. We're going to uncomment those in a little bit. All right. But for now, let's go back to styling the footer portion of our HTML. So now let's put in footer. We'll put in margin top, 5 M units or so. Display is going to be grid because we have two elements inside of it, which is the button, the share button, and then also the date. So a grid will allow us to put grid template columns. Repeat 2 columns, and they'll both be auto. All right, so let's just save that and see what happens. Okay, so you can see now they're in 2 columns, but they look like garbage. And inside of that, we're just going to reference our link, or a button rather. Text decoration none. Background is that button background color from Figma. Font weight's bold color. Display inline block. Text align center, padding, and border radius. Nothing special happening here. It's going to look a lot better right there. And of course, we have an issue with it not being, the icon's a little bit too tall. We'll fix that. So we'll fix that by taking the SVG element and putting that information there. There we go. Now it's perfectly in line and center. Now let's take our date and save that. Nothing special happening there either. Now what does not look good is this high contrast border being right up against the edge of that date and also being right down here. So I thought to myself, how can we fix this? We could take this border and put it behind this card. That would be a fix. Or we could use the very cool clip path property. So let me show you that. If you go to Clippy CSS, or just type that Clippy CSS, first result takes you to here, trapezoid. We just need 4 points essentially. What we can do is kind of push this up like right around here. And when you do that, you copy this code and paste it in. So I've already done that, and that's the code that we needed to comment out. Now, this right here completely hides it. If we come back and save this, as we can see, that border went away. However, if we change it to the Clippy property, kind of like when it's structured like this, because I'll show you why it hid it in a second, but if we change it just temporarily to this property and save it, we will see what it looks like. So there, now we have kind of it just gives this stuff more room and it won't clutter this area. All right, very cool. But by default, we don't want to see this. We only want to see this border on hover. That's the decision that we've made arbitrarily. So what we'll do is kind of leave it back at 0, which completely hides it. And in other words, what that does to emulate that, you take all these points and just put them up here. And that's why you get 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 down there. So what we can do now is we're going to add a class. We're going to create a class called add-border and .container before. So what we're doing essentially is we're going to use JavaScript to add this class or toggle it on and off based on the, well, you don't have it down here yet under rester parameters, but on mouse enter, we'll toggle that on. We'll add that class essentially, where we will overwrite this property to this, just like that. All right, so this does nothing yet. So we have to refer back to our, let's see, our documentation just to get that rough scaffolding going. And if we scroll down, we'll see it right here. So if we take all this stuff and just from there and copy that, we will paste it in right here and save it. Now this is going to end up changing some stuff, I believe. No, actually it's not. All right, so what we want to do now is let's get that border working. So as you can see, we have on enter. And if we opened up our console in the browser, we would see enter, enter every time our mouse entered it. So what we want to do is we want to create a reference to our container element right here. We need a reference to it in JavaScript to be able to access it so that we can attach that class right here upon enter, because add border will be referencing this container pseudo before element right there. So let's come down and right here, or actually at the top, we'll put in let container equals document.query selector and .container. So then inside of on enter, we can put container.classList.add, and this is all vanilla JavaScript, add border. All right, and then when the mouse leaves, which we'll do this in a second. Let's just save it to see what happens. Ah, look at that. Now when the mouse leaves, we want that to leave as well. We also want to transition this and animate it essentially. So container.classList.remove, add border. So now it's going to toggle it on and off, but it won't animate just yet. Look at that. All right, so that's cool. So now what we want is we want to go to our CSS here and uncomment transition the click path property right here. So now, bloop, look at that. Isn't that just cool? So we could also do other things with this on enter here. Let's say, for instance, we wanted to gain access to the title or the H1 element and make it grow. So I just pasted this line right here on 53. Let title document query selector H1. And then we could do something like this as well. So we could say title.style transform equals scale 1.5. So we're going to, or 1.15 rather. We don't want to go 1.5. It would become way too large. Translate X, there we go. And we'll do -90 pixels because translate X -90 was what we already had set here right there. If we didn't include translate X here, it would throw that off. In fact, let me just show you. So if we come back here, look what it does. See how it moves it over? Not nice. So we'll save that now. And why is it staying large? Well, if we come back, it's because we haven't reversed the effect over here. So what I'll do is paste this element right here. It's the same thing, except we're taking the scale back to 1. That's the only difference is within this parameter right here. We're just resetting it back to 1. Oops, let me get back to the browser there. Now, what's the problem here? It's not animating. There's no transition on it. So let's go ahead and make that work. So if we go back to our actual, if I can get it, sorry about that, our H1, let's see what we have going here and make sure that I have, yes, transition, transform, 0.7 seconds. And of course, you can experiment with all this stuff. And there we go. If we look back to the documentation, you have a lot of different options here. There's a shadow that you can add, shadow offset. You can toggle that to false if you don't want it. There's also, if I come down here, rotate X max and rotate Y max. By default, it's set at 15, but I'll just show you kind of what it looks like if we really exaggerate those to show you what happens when you play with those. So let's set those to like 35, and there should be quite a bit of difference. So if we come back here, as you can see now, it's a little bit too much. So 35, way too much. I'd probably stick between 10 to 15 max. By default, 15 if we remove those, and we come back, we'll see it's nice and subtle. It's just not, it's not really overbearing too much. Now, you might be wondering, how can we get this card right here to also move, like to have everything move? So all we have to do is this my Atropos, that's where we've placed on the background image and the white color. So what we can do is just take this stuff, move it out of there, and put it onto the container element. So look at that. Now everything moves. And so the reason that is because if we look at the HTML, anything inside of here is going to be affected by scale. Anything inside of here will be scale and rotate. And anything inside of here, the inner, of course, will be affected by all three. So being that we took initially this my Atropos and put that background here, it's not affected by all this stuff in here. Hopefully that makes sense. So let me just undo that. I kind of like this aesthetic better personally. And if we go back, we'll see essentially the final result. So there's a lot you can do with those hooks on enter and leave. And so yeah, it's really just up to you. It's just kind of like a gimmicky thing, but it's still pretty fun to experiment with. All right, everybody, hopefully you found that interesting. Parallax is always fun, but it's also one of those things that you can overuse significantly. So when you use it sparingly, and also try not to use extreme dramatic effects. Like try to dial down the amount of parallax you use because it can be jolting for some users. All right, so as always, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye.